Hello guys, so just a quick thing to say about sword knots. This is a sword knot. So the way that you see most Victorian swords, antiques, is without this attached, okay? Because they are made of fabric with metal sort of wire wound in, and they tend to perish, they tend not to survive, or people take them off and lose them. And so they're not usually surviving on the antiques. In this case, this is a genuine, it's a Wilkinson made from 1860. Wilkinson made infantry officer's sword, the 1854 pattern, and this is a modern replica sword knot. However, I do have antique sword knots, and it's basically identical. It's just shinier and newer looking than the antique ones. The first thing to say, I suppose, is usually when people are used to seeing these in photographs, or if they survive on the originals, it's usually wound around the guard at the front, and it's not in any kind of usable way. It looks like a strange kind of wrapping around the front of the guard, and you think, what's that for? But how they were actually usually, when the sword was worn and carried around, they were usually put through. There's a slot in the guard there for the sword knot. Some swords have a slot up by the side of the grip or in other parts of the hilt, or sometimes they're just looped around the actual bottom bar of the guard itself, and they're usually in photographs and so on, they shown just hanging down like that. And what are they for? Well, very simply, they're for you to, when you're using the sword, when you're actually either if you're in combat, I suppose, or if you're just directing troops, or if you're on parade, it's for you to make sure you don't lose the sword. But it's a very fancy, ornate type of one. So in the British military, this is specifically for an infantry officer. It's flat with 3 red lines and gold bullioned wire woven into it, with a heavy sort of acorn, it's known as, on the end. And how do you use it? Okay, so imagine your sword is hanging down by your side. You pull that little toggle up, you open up a bit that's big enough for you to get your hand through, you stick your hand through, and then contemporary sources from the period say you give a couple of twists. In my experience, it's actually probably about 4 twists, and what that does is it means that once you're gripping the sword, it flaps around less, and it makes this acorn on the end tighter. Once you've done a few twists on the sword knot, you then grab the sword, draw it, and you've now got, if you drop the sword, it's not a disaster, it stays connected to your wrist. Obviously, if you're on a horse, this is critical in combat, because you don't have time to get off your horse and get the sword again. So even if you want to use your hands for something else, maybe using a shotgun or a rifle, or if your horse has gone out of control and you need both hands to get control again, your sword will carry on hanging there safely, and to recover the thing, you can easily get it back. The sword knot doesn't really impede or get in the way, although if you're not used to it, the weight of that acorn can feel a bit weird. It can be a bit distracting if you're actually fencing with a sword knot on. And I have fenced with the sword knot on, and it is a bit strange if you're not used to it. But once you get used to it, you just kind of forget that it's there. Now, an important thing to add is that actually on active service, many British officers, and I imagine officers in other militaries of the same period, French and Italian and so on, actually took off this ornate sword knot and very commonly replaced it with a silk handkerchief. Yes, a silk handkerchief. So not necessarily for mopping your brow or blowing your nose in anymore, but they used it as a sword knot. And silk is actually a very good material because it's incredibly light, comfortable against your skin, it doesn't get very sweaty underneath, and it's also quite cut resistant, silk. It was used by the Mongols as an undergarment for protection against arrow penetrations, or more precisely to assist the extraction of arrows. So silk has good martial qualities, and if you look at John Musgrave Waite's treatise from 1880, for example, he advises using a silk handkerchief as a sword knot. So there you go. Sword knots are not particularly interesting, but they are part of Victorian martial culture, so it's worth knowing something about them. Thank you.